you'd had this character for years, but you'd never really considered who she was before she started adventuring, right? Because
I had her for 10 years.
Wow. Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we love geeky wisdom, and you have found A Point of Inspiration, our new series, where I chat with someone, interview-ish style, and I thought for our first episode in this series, who would be better than my partner with Geek Philosophy, but more importantly, my partner in life, Crystal. So let's get rolling. All right, hey there.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going good. How's it going with you?
It's good, as if I didn't just see you like 10 minutes ago. So.
As if I'm not upstairs.
I know, right? Too funny. All right, so awesome. So we're going to give everybody a chance to get to know you a little bit better. They hear from me all the time. So we're going to jump right in with, I'll ask some questions, but, you know, again, it'll be chatting back and forth mostly. So I think the first thing is, you know, what in your just everyday life helped you connect with this crazy world of Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy stuff and all the geekiness that we've got? We'll get into how you started D&D in just a minute, but what in your normal day-to-day, even before we met, that kind of connects you to this stuff?
Well, I started reading really young. I found my love for reading early in my probably, you know, early teens. And one of the things that I loved the most and the books that I gravitated to the most were fantasy novels, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of romance, but overall very heavy on the fantasy side of things. As I got older and started working in my career, I found myself on my lunch breaks at the bookstore, trying to get my hands on the latest, you know, novels that were out, and being one of the only girls in the aisle for fantasy because mostly it was boys or men. Yeah. And then I guess I didn't really find that it was strange until I talked to a few people and they said, oh, well, you know, normally it's not really the genre that women are drawn to. Yeah. But I've always loved fantasy.
I can vouch for that. Like when my friends and I would go, this was back in the days where people would actually go to the mall. We would go to the mall. There was a book chain called B. Dalton that was, and Walden Books was another one. And they were these small little bookstores in the mall. And we would go in and we would go basically sit on the floor in front of the fantasy book section, and for us to the D&D section, and it would just be us nerdy guys just sitting there. And very rarely would we ever see any of the girls our age come down that aisle or even show up near that bookstore, really. But and if they were reading, because there were a lot of readers obviously, but they weren't coming near that section for the most part, or at least we didn't see them. We probably were scaring them off, sitting there and lurking next to all the books. So, you know, live and learn. But I can totally see that, especially with how much you read now. Like, how many books are you still reading, like, weekly? It seems like a ton.
I read to relax, and so it really kind of depends on what my mood is, on what I'm reading. If I just want something simple to be, you know, relaxed at the end of the night, it's usually, you know, eye candy, brain candy. And then every so often I'll choose to sink my teeth into a really good thick novel, but I probably finish 5 to 8 books a week.
Wow. That's crazy. So having said that, what are your favorite, I don't want to narrow it down to favorite books, but like, what are your favorite themes that you've been interested in lately? The favorite types of books that you've been kind of consuming?
So I really love magic. I like the idea of there being other realms, or of there already being realms that exist, like that coincide at the same point that ours do. Gotcha. It's just there's a veil, or, you know, something of where there's different races and different, you know, backgrounds, and I went through a phase where I like to read about angels, but fantasy angels,
Yeah.
not biblical angels.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
I went through a phase where I also like reading about reapers and elves and things of that nature. And right now it's kind of a toss up of like afterworld or afterlife and what happens afterwards, but it's more fantasy versus the reality of what humans think
What's
possibly
funny
happened.
is I'm a big fan of fantasy books too, as it's no stranger to anybody that's been watching the channel. But definitely, I have not consumed as many fantasy novels as you. And the ones I do love, I really love. Like I'm really into, and I'll reread them many, many times. What's interesting is when pandemic hit, you got me into a show that I never really. You would think I would have watched it, but Supernatural. Like I
Yes.
was like, I mean, I was around and it was there, but I just for some reason I never was, hooked into Supernatural. And then pandemic hit and nobody could really go anywhere anyway. And I think we made it through. Here's
Hi,
Romeo. Yeah,
Romeo.
who is also
That's
from another realm.
another member of our family.
Yeah,
We adopted.
yeah.
He's my familiar.
He is he is her familiar, and he has made his debut into many live stream campaign videos already. So you'll have to get used to him. Bear with the Fey cat that sometimes comes in because he's definitely from another realm.
Yes.
But what I was gonna say was like I think we made it through like what was it 15 years worth of Supernatural or whatever it was. Like we just kept watching and just
Yes.
marathoning and like we'd kept
Yeah.
get back up. But that
Uh,
says a lot to like connect with the types of books that you're into too, because Supernatural was one of those shows that was like uh, every week it could have been a different type of thing, and so it
right.
was really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
And likewise, like long running, huge fan of Buffy the Vampire
yep,
Slayer and Charmed, the original Charmed versus the modern day Charmed. I think my day to day life growing up was not very magical, wasn't really allowed to believe in magic and all those things. And so I gravitated towards that kind of in my secret, my private life. And then as I got older and became an adult and could do all those things, outwardly without
you can do what you want.
repercussion, right? It was full force.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So awesome. So let's take it into what most people know this channel for. So let's talk a little bit about getting into D&D.
okay.
So how did you get started? I'll let you tell the story because if I tell the story, it'll be wrong. So let's let you tell me how you got started with D&D.
Well, I got started with D&D when I started seeing this guy. And he found out that I was an avid World of Warcraft player and also a Magic the Gathering player. And his question was, have you never played D&D? How
Yeah.
is this?
Yeah.
So he introduced me to it and probably changed my life. It's
Wow.
Well, I mean, we do it a lot. This
That's
family does a
true.
lot of
That's
D&D.
true.
And if
Yeah.
we're not playing D&D, we're talking about playing D&D and we're creating characters or coming up with some theme for something.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, I guess some family have sports, some family, families go rock climbing, some families, do other things, but we D&D, and it's one of the things that we do a lot.
Or
So you're right.
just nerdy, geeky things,
That's true. That's true. Just in general.
We both,
Yeah.
we both read a lot. We both have our own creative outlets. We both have, it's, you like crafting terrain and coming up with whole worlds, and I like drawing and painting and, sitting for hours and coming up with concepts for characters. So
Yeah, it's what's funny is you also had we were talking about how when you were younger liking books and not finding many other girls your age, teens your age that were into it, that were like you, right? That not a whole lot of females that your age that were also into the same
right.
types of books and stuff. What's interesting to me is when you started playing your first real campaign, was with one of your longtime best friends. And
Yes.
so it's really interesting that like, and it was one of the first times I had so many females playing the game at once. So it was,
Oh, I can entice people to
yeah,
play the
that's right.
game.
Yeah,
I can bring all kinds of girls to the table.
yeah. And you
With the
have,
industry that I,
yeah,
yeah, with the industry that I'm in, I only know mainly women,
yeah.
and so, and they're creative women, and so you just tell them that they could have a good time sitting around rolling some dice and playing pretend. They want to see it, and they've loved it so far.
Yeah, well, and if anybody that's been following the channel and has watched our Relics of the Ancients campaign knows that you even got someone to start D&D with a live stream with actually the first time
Yes,
playing was in front of the
yes,
world, basically. So
she was
yeah,
fearless.
yeah, Melanie did awesome. Yeah, so
She did great.
is it that D&D? Well, I mean, obviously there was me, and we had a connection already. But was there anything that you can remember that you really connected to with D&D from the start? That it was like this, it pulled you in beyond because yes, it was the fact that we were together and that kind of was the introduction. But you wouldn't have kept playing if you didn't like it. Like you definitely wouldn't have just kept doing it just because I like doing it, right? So what was
Right.
it that was your initial I like this game and it connects with you?
Well, initially, when we played our first game, I was coming from the background of playing World of Warcraft, really. Um, because when you play Magic, you don't create a character. You're
Right.
whatever cards you have. And so Magic came after World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft, I created characters. And when we had our first D&D
Yeah.
game, I just took my character from WoW and created her.
Really? Okay, let's dive into World of Warcraft a little bit more because for as much as I was a huge D&D player, I only dabbled a little bit in WoW, so let's talk about it. So, playing World of Warcraft. So, you are definitely the if there was a dungeon master level of World of Warcraft, you would have reached that at least in comparison to me, right? Like you had played it for a long time and probably had more characters than I could count. So, what? Let me ask you this: what was your draw into World of Warcraft? Was it the books that you read and that kind of stuff, and then finding a connection to it on in a video game that you could play with other people? What was the draw to World of Warcraft?
Well, I'm in that weird generation that falls between, people who didn't have the internet growing up and then people who got it, later in their teens.
Right.
So, we had one computer in the house in the living room as I was graduating high school. And when I moved out of the house and got my own apartment, one of the first things I did is I got myself my own computer because I saw it as a way to still be at home, a little bit of an introvert, but to be able to meet people and to be able to do some research. I like to Google a lot. I like to figure out, I'm a very curious person. So I don't even know why I started or why I tried, but I tried out several different online games and they just didn't do it for me. And at some point I tried WoW and it was almost an instant, okay, all right, this has everything I'm looking for.
What was it that you were looking for, do you think?
I don't even think I knew. I just am
Yeah.
one of those people. It just kind of clicked. I was like, okay, I like this. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's pretty smooth playing. It was explanatory in the very beginning, tutorial wise, and then one of the other games that I played that I won't name. When you died, other people could loot your body, and that was not okay with me.
Yeah.
So, especially being like a brand new noob, I was gonna die a lot. And somebody better not come along and take my stuff. So with World of Warcraft, all of your stuff is still there whenever you get back to your body and resurrect.
Yeah.
And pretty quickly, I kind of found a guild and made some friends, and just it became an obsession.
So for those that don't know, what's a guild in World of Warcraft?
A guild is a group of people ours was across, spanned the globe. We had some people in Australia and Canada. We had different time zones across the world, and it's just a group of like-minded people who like to get together and play. At a certain point, Ventrilo was introduced, which was our first comm system that we had, which I guess now it's Discord, but and then you actually could hear people's voices other than just typing,
So you could actually talk to one another as you're playing.
Yes. And so certain events in World of Warcraft, you really need to have a group. Some of the events were 40 people, some of the events were 20 people, some of the events were 5 people. And so you really did not want to compose your group of people you didn't know. You each had a part and you had a role to play. And usually if you had someone who was leading the group or the raiding group, they would explain to you what your part is.
So that's kind of similar, right? Like with D&D, like your guild is almost like your party, right? Your playing group. You have to come together. You have roles that you have in the group. Some people are specialized in some things and some people are specialized in others. But I would guess that the personalities of the group also kind of have to mesh.
Yes, they do. And being a woman, a lot of people can play girls online. They're creating their character, they log in, they create a woman. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a woman behind the screen. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you're actually on comms with somebody, you find out if they're a woman or a man. And I think when you start getting online and people start hearing your voice and it becomes more real. So personalities definitely come out a little bit more. And also, people trying to talk to you in the off time and, all that once they find out you're a real girl. Right. So, because that was always the thing. They're like, oh my goodness, you're a real girl? Yes, I'm a real girl.
Yeah. Well, and then there's challenges too, right? Like all the isms, right, come out whenever you're involved with that. And there, unfortunately, sometimes the internet can be a toxic place from time to time. But at least being able to talk it through and like find out who those people are and not have them in your guild anymore or join a different guild if you need to.
Right.
But I'm sure it's stuff that I probably wouldn't have had to worry about as much, which is a shame. But that you would have had to, but I guess that's just the way it is for a lot of people. So.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, there wasn't really too many bad experiences. Oh, if nothing, they were just a little shocked that I was a girl, and then it was, you could do whatever you wanted. I mean, they wanted you in every group. They wanted you in every party. Yes. They're like, yes, Crystal's online. Like, let's get her in. Or Mel Winden, like, let's get her in here. Yeah. Because, I also played somebody who was a pocket healer, and so it's like, okay, all right, she can come heal. And she heals really well. She knows her role.
Everybody likes the cleric of the party. Yeah.
Well, druid, but,
Yeah, right.
I always like to have a druid that can fight and can heal. And you could dual spec in World of Warcraft. So
yeah, so that's interesting. So is that something that World of Warcraft kind of does better? Is that you can dual spec and things like that? Or well, let me ask you, what are some of the things that now that you've played D&D for a while that maybe you're missing that World of Warcraft did, but D&D doesn't quite do it the same way, or it handles it in a way that you're not a fan
of? So one of the things that I really liked about World of Warcraft was the crafting and the professions that you could have. You can still do that stuff in D&D. However, there's not really any information on it. There's not enough, I mean, for instance, in our last campaign, my girl, she was an herbalist, and I had 4 or 5 pages of herbs and mushrooms and a whole way to grow mushrooms written down, reagents and, how many vials do I need? I was setting aside gold, and it doesn't really come into play. And that's a part that I miss. So I would actively say, okay, I'm looking for, whatever reagents, flowers, herbs, roots around as we were traveling, just to, I guess, can keep that in her character
I have to say you're right. Like it's not something that there's a whole lot of information around. Even as a DM, like there's not a whole lot of guidance for how to handle that. I would also say that the tricky part about that as a DM is balancing player time, right? Making sure that everybody gets equal time at the table, but you do want to make sure that someone's having fun and that you've got a way to handle it. I would say that one of the coolest things about D&D is the flexibility. So it may take a little bit more of an inventive DM to make it work. It could make for some really good solo missions, like where you spend time one-on-one DM and player going through and doing those things, because then you can really hone in on it. But you're absolutely right, like it's not a huge part of the game as it's built in, whereas I'm sure you spent a lot of time just walking around on your own without that guild, collecting stuff for your crafting, right?
That was probably 90% of what I did. If I was exhausted from having worked all day long, standing on my feet, I literally would come home and sit at the computer for hours picking flowers so that I could make potions.
So just for those of you that don't know or haven't, and this is now common in other games too, like Skyrim has, like it's not uncommon in a lot of different games, but open world type games, for those of you that don't know, if you're walking around and you see flowers, you could actually walk up and pick those flowers, and certain ingredients can combine and make certain like potions or all kinds of different stuff. And then you were also talking about like other crafting things. Couldn't you smith weapons and armor and things like that too?
So I had a lot of different characters, and they all specialized in certain things because you could send in-game mail to yourself. So one girl would be the alchemist, and one girl would be the blacksmith. And, I could make armor, I could make potions, I could make like cloth armor that was more of an enchanter, or weaver, and then an enchanter who you could enchant materials back and forth, or you can enchant a vellum and send it to yourself in game or sell them on the auction house. Oh yeah, there's a whole game inside the game.
So each one of these characters were in your mind kind of living, breathing people that could actually also mail things to other characters.
Yes. Yeah, that's and awesome. Then I had one character that was my bank character, that was the one that always went to the bank and carried all my money.
So, now that you are an experienced Dungeons and Dragons player, what do you like more about D&D? It's not that any game is better or worse, but in your mind, what is the best parts of D&D compared to WoW?
So what I really like about D&D compared to WoW, or something of that nature, is that you can really take your character's backstory wherever you want it to be. When you log into WoW, nobody cares what Mel Winden did in her past. They just care that she is a druid that can heal them, or that can put out a lot of long-range DPS. There's no care to, does she have a family? Does she not have a family? And even as a person playing, you're not really taught to care, because you have a character, you have an avatar.
True.
And you just play as that person. So I guess in my mind, like, she was just me, not her own entity. Whereas I feel like with D&D, even though I brought her over as my first D&D character, like, I made her backstory, it made me think about, okay, I've played this character since the beginning of World of Warcraft in 2006, and she's the first character I made, but never thought about who she was. And so I had to sit down and think about that with with D&D whenever I was building her out. And that has been one of the things I found that I actually enjoy the most is, okay, I have this character, great concept for a character. Now, who are they? Why are they that way? What is it that they do? What is it that they're looking for? All of those things. And D&D taught me to think that way versus just, okay, all right, I've got a druid that can kill things.
Right.
And run quests. So
it just, it's so funny that I didn't even realize that until you just said it. Like, you'd had this character for years, but you'd never really considered who she was before she started adventuring, right? Because
I had her for 10 years.
Wow.
She was the first character that I made. and she was the character that I played the most. And she was the character that was in all of the ratings and things. And so whenever we started D&D, it just was more natural for me to say, okay, all right, I'm going to be Mel Winden, just like I was when I was playing World of Warcraft. But then it was like, oh my gosh, who is Mel Winden? Because she was just me in this game as a night elf druid.
Right. Well, and
so,
what's interesting to me too is that you could play D&D that way too, right? Like there's a lot of people that play D&D by just rolling up a character and just playing and not really thinking too much about what they were in the past. But there's something to, and probably just the play style that we started with, right? That where we really kind of get into the role play a lot and telling that collaborative story together. But you have a lot more options, I think, with a tabletop role-playing game to kind of flesh things out, take it as far as you want to go, or reel back and just be surface. If you want to just be sort of that surface level, this is my character, it's an elven druid, then that's fine, right? But you could take it to a whole nother level, and those things would have an impact in the game. Whereas, like, if you thought that way, and nothing's going to really change in WoW, if you came up with that whole backstory and then played Mel Winden, it wouldn't change anything about WoW, right? So
no one cares.
Yeah,
they just want you to provide the service that you're supposed to provide. Yeah. Whereas, I mean, maybe if you talk with somebody off game, you can tell them the whole concept, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's cool, but really weird. Because why have you thought that far into your character?"
But your character's like backstory that you created in your mind had no potential of making it into the video game. It's not like the enemy that like was an enemy of your forefathers is going to show up in the game. Whereas in D&D, talk to your DM, that could happen. Like you could actually have those people that are your cousins and your family show up in the game, and right. it's really interesting. So that's cool. So let's dive in a little deeper to some things about you, because you've been connected to D&D in a lot of different ways too. So let me take you down that path a little bit. So been playing for a while now, and I think mentioning that the whole character building and coming up with the backstory and the personality and stuff was something that was important to you now. But is there anything else about the game that you did not expect would be so interesting, fascinating, or just fun that actually became a big deal to you?
Well, I started collecting dice, and by collecting I mean hoarding.
Yeah.
I have a lot of dice. Each character has their own palette for me to play with. That, and then I take tons and tons of notes. But the problem is that I have ADHD, so I have 5 or 6 different notebooks, and I never really know which notebook my notes are in. So that can be a little frustrating in game. I have 5 different notebooks out, and I'm like, no, it's not in this one. Yeah, cosplay's been a big thing too. After you introduced me to Critical Role, trying to cosplay more as someone from their game. I really liked dressing up as Jester, and then you were Pumat, which was super fun. For years, I dressed up for Halloween for work. I wasn't allowed to dress up as a kid for Halloween or to participate in Halloween. So whenever I became an adult, every single year I dressed up to the nth degree, and I always found myself dressing up as my World of Warcraft characters or as someone from a fantasy realm, and then I would have to explain to everyone who I was because no one understood. I remember one Halloween I dressed up as Crystalline, which was one of my other World of Warcraft characters that had gray hair. And everyone asked me who I was, and I would explain, and they'd say, an elf? Like, but you don't look like a Christmas elf. No, like a Lord of the Rings elf. Like, Nobody got it. Yeah. So I remember walking around all day going, well, okay, if I have to explain again one more time who I am.
So you've got dice, you've got, cosplay. Been going to conventions for years.
Yes.
So what about just the things that happen outside of the game, like these types of things, right? I mean, even though you are using the dice in the game, but you're actually active, I know, on certain forums about the dice. You
Oh yeah.
research different types of things for makeup and cosplay.
Yes.
You've done a lot to like, and these aren't. I mean, I love dice, and I've had a bunch of dice, but not to the level you are, right? So some of these things are completely your own, in as far as like parts of the hobby, right? So it's not like anybody can say, well, you're only doing that because, you know, because Brian's doing it, like, because I'm not doing a lot of those things. I cosplay with you, but I don't go as deep as you go and like researching the different
Oh, I
things,
know.
right? So
I'm usually the one out finding your wigs.
that's
I'm
right.
usually the one figuring out what makeup we're gonna
Yeah.
do. You know, I'm the one looking at the outfits, going, okay, all right, I think we can make this work. Do I need to sew this? You know, I mean, it isn't. I'm not a great seamstress by any means, but I'm a really good MacGyver, and
Yeah.
I can make anything happen. So as long as I have a vision of where I'm going, I can get there.
Well,
Um,
for those of you that are watching, I promise to include a few uh, photos at the end of some of our cosplays, so you can see what it looks like. So stick with us to the end, and you'll get a chance to see some of those. But
yes.
yeah, I think, well, and I tell you what, and this will lead right into our next topic. One of the best things is when we actually cosplayed, like you mentioned, Jester and Pumat Soul from Critical Role, and then tweeted it out. We had Matt Mercer say looks great, like comment on our. I was like, what? That's just like,
I know.
it's
You're
so
like,
awesome. I was like, this was a character that was in your head, and this is a character that came out of someone on Critical Role's head. So speaking of Critical Role, so you mentioned that, you know, we kind of got started with D&D around the same time as starting to watch Critical Role, or at least your first campaign I started around the same time as we started watching together. And I remember us, because we weren't living in the same house yet. We were actually across the state, and we were doing our synchronized Critical Role watchings, with both of us putting on Twitch at the same time whenever it would
mm-hmm.
air, and we watched the I think the first episode of Campaign 2 together that way, and then we ended up finishing it here. But what about Critical Role is awesome to you? What do you love about it?
So what was really cool about Critical Role is we had already played a game or two,
Yeah.
and you had spent so much time explaining this game to me, and you know, going through the books. You know, I like to absorb a lot of information, so reading through the books, then trying to like wrap my head around how you're supposed to do it. Well, Critical Role gave me visual of how I'm supposed to do it. And they also role play. So I had never really done a lot of quote unquote role playing. Even though I had played World of Warcraft and I had done things like that, I was not speaking as if I was Mel Winden in the
Right.
game.
Right.
You know, they just called me Mel, and then it was Crystal running the scene. It wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, a character. So Critical Role really, I think, gave me the ability to understand really what role playing is. I mean, up until that point, you know, in whatever I was doing, sometimes, you know, we would try to do little workshops at work and they try to do role playing, and I'd always be like, this is so
Yeah,
cheesy.
yeah.
Like, you know, going back and forth between the professional and the client, what, you know, whatnot, and whatever field you're in, it can get really weird and you
Yeah.
feel really uncomfortable. And so that had really been my only experience trying to play somebody other than myself.
Yeah.
And watching Critical Role, I really liked how they just became their characters.
Yep.
And the silly voices, and, you know, sometimes they would dress up. But other than that, like popping in and out of their character, whether they were talking to their DM or they were talking to their group, I think it kind of gave me an idea on how to roleplay. So, and then seeing the different like dynamics between the friends, and getting kind of a feel for how the flow should go for a game.
Yeah.
not being the person that's the dominant person talking all the time, not being the person who's completely quiet all the time. There's a good middle ground on, how to be an involved part of the party
Yeah.
without being the loudest or the least involved. So to me, I think they do a really good job, and they have a really good cohesive group. So I enjoy watching them a lot.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with like they're almost like this is the epitome of acting and like your character because they are actors, right? They are as they're trained voice actors. They know how to do that stuff. They know how to get into character. That I want to say though, like for other people watching, that their way of playing is not the only way to play D&D, right? Like there's so many ways to play D&D, but I agree with you. Like it was sort of exemplifying what I had in my head D&D should be, as far as like getting in character and everybody at the table caring about the characters and caring about the story. And but even even it was real whenever like they started to feel in danger. All that stuff kind of went away, and you could just feel the impact of, I'm about to lose my character because this person just rolled so much damage on me. I'm down. Like even that, like even with the all of the acting training and everything else, it's still D&D, and you can tell when it's happening. I also love the fact, for me at least, that it gives you a glimpse of when a dungeon master is doing things really, really well, how games can go, but also when people take things and turn it around and go a different direction, how dungeon masters kind of have to roll with it, or the best ones do, right? And I think there were times where like Matt Mercer had a whole thing planned, and he was like, "Well, we're not doing that today." Like, and this was like live on camera. He's like, "Well, you guys completely avoided this," and I've been there, right? Like, so it's not the easiest thing to do to put games together at that production value, especially after campaign 2. But like, I think it opened up a lot of people because they could see what D&D was, at least at some level. But also, there are a lot of other people playing games out there, and they do it differently, and it's just as valid, right? Like, so I think that was one of the cool things about us doing a live stream that we did when we were first starting this channel, because it just showed some regular people playing D&D, and we're not Critical Role, but we still had fun, and we still cared about our characters. And,
right.
And
and one of the things that I thought was also interesting when I first started is, whenever there would be scenes that were, or times that were more emotionally heavy, and a few of the guys would start crying, or the girls would start crying, and at first I remember thinking, is that fake? Like, are they really upset, like, as people, or is this their character, or and then coming to realize, oh no, they're really upset, like something's going on, and they are really feeling it. It is not, they're just like shedding a tear for the camera. I felt like, you feel like there's a connection. And I remembered at one point when I was playing WoW, I got Melwinden stuck. Went somewhere where I wasn't supposed to go. Like, there's always these like hardware glitches that are in there, or software glitches that are in there. And she got stuck in a tunnel that wasn't supposed to be somewhere you could go. And I couldn't get her out. No matter what I did, I could not get her out. Couldn't restart the game. I could not and so she just sat there for a couple of days. And I remember I was just crying. I'm like, I've lost her. I don't know I don't know how to get her out. I ended up having to call the company, get a guy on the phone. He had to go in and remove her from where she was and restart it. I was so upset. And so it really, watching Critical Role, I was like, oh no, they're vested in their characters.
Yeah,
okay.
well, I think even just us playing, right? Like, we've all had those moments, even in our own games, where it's really hard to explain to someone that hasn't played before, or hasn't at least cared about what they're playing. Like, because it's one thing to play, it's another thing to actually care about the game that you're playing in. And it doesn't mean you have to be overly dramatic or whatever. It's just, if you're connecting with the game and connecting with the story, it can hit you depending on how things are going.
Well,
and
like
all kinds of different
the first
ways.
episode of our last game. I started crying in the middle of it, and I'm like, why did you do this to me? Why? Because now I'm crying,
Yep.
and that was not what I was expecting at all.
Well, and it's that's what it is, right? It's when you least expect it that things like that happen. But also the laughter is real, the joy is real. Like it's a
Yes,
shared experience. Like we're
the
really just
anger.
yeah, the anger about things is real. It's the same thing. I mean, I equate it to like, humanity used to sit around a campfire for as long as there's ever been humanity and sit and tell stories, and that's really what we're doing. It's just a new version of sitting around a campfire and telling stories, but with a little bit of dice and some math, right? So like it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's it's just a different way of doing it. But yeah, Critical Role I think had a huge impact on me, especially. I've been playing well before Critical Role was around, but like to validate some of the things I thought about the game, but also to like show, oh, this is a different way of doing it. I still like my way, but on some things, and on other things, I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
that's great. I'm going to adopt that." I think that's one of the best things about D&D. There's no right way. The only right way, the only wrong way to play D&D is to not have fun and to not be good to the people at the table. If you're being a jerk to the people at the table, that's wrong. And if you are not having fun, it's not good, right? So I think those are the only two things that really, to me, mean bad D&D. As long as everybody's having a good time, who cares about the rest,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. Don't be a
but
jerk.
yeah, yeah, don't be a jerk and have fun. That's kind of it. Um,
And
awesome.
come prepared.
Yeah, come prepared. Yeah, but,
Do a
that's part
little
of
bit of something.
yeah, yeah. Do your best to kind of help out everybody at the table, right? So, um,
Yes.
awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking some time, and we'll do this again. I'm sure it was just like a preview of all the things, just getting to know Crystal a little bit. So, um, anything you want to leave us with as we sign off for today?
Um, just to give D&D a chance. And it's so much fun to think not as yourself sometimes. And I think if you can let go and just use your imagination, really, you can do anything.
Here, here. Can't be better said than that. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Have fun, play some games, and we'll see you next time.